go. I've
Perfect.
done this
Okay.
more than once, and
You're doing great.
hi, Professor Palmer. Hello, Professor Palmer. Thank you so much for letting us interview you for our project. As you know, our project focuses on housing and gentrification, and what we're particularly interested in is what you think incoming SP2 students should know about gentrification in the West Philadelphia area, and why it's important for them to know about gentrification. And we thought you'd be the best person to ask these questions because of your history in Philadelphia, as a longtime resident and activist in the community. So to begin, I was thinking we can start off by having you define gentrification.
Okay.
How would you define it?
First of all, thanks so much for inviting me to talk to you in your class. I appreciate the opportunity. When I think in terms of gentrification, and I think it's right in line with what SP2 students are trying to learn, particularly out of 713, I equate that along with colonization. So if you think in terms of the elements of colonization, where in fact you have a community of a living community, and they're somehow engaged or interrupted or interjected by an outside force. And it's kind of like neo-colonialism. They're confined to a particular space or location. They have limited mobility, being able to move in or move out. They are culturally invaded. There's cultural invasion, right? So all the elements of neo-colonialism, colonialism, and neo-colonialism and gentrification, I think, are part and parcel. Now there'll be people who argue and say gentrification is worthwhile, and then what it does, it offers a new opportunity, and it offers new land, use of land, etc., and it makes improvements. Well, it does, but it all depends on who it's being made for. When I think in terms of gentrification prior to the gentrifiers, I think in terms of people who are in a community, and the community really invites us to come in and participate with them. Or the community is disrupted by an outside force which has the economic power and police power to be able to do it. And so we are a guest. The University of Pennsylvania is a guest in someone else's neighborhood.
Right.
Therefore, most guests, most civil guests, engage one another. They participate, and the guest acts like a guest, and it's not intrusive and abusive. University of Pennsylvania has had a history of being both intrusive and abusive to the surrounding community. University of Pennsylvania sits in West Philadelphia and is surrounded by over 500,000 people who don't look like the people who attend the University of Pennsylvania. So culturally, there's a group of people who, for the most part, are going to be dominated by a minority group of people who are foreign to one another. So gentrification provides the opportunity to have really sophisticated notion about colonialization. In the neighborhood in question, where I was raised, in the lower end of West Philadelphia, the boundaries for that community I lived in ran from 32nd Street on the east, 40th Street on the west, Lancaster Avenue on the north, and all the way over to University Avenue on the south, passing University Hospital. Okay? Most black people lived between Ludlow Street, which is just one block south of Market, and going north to Lancaster Avenue and 32nd to 40th Street. Historically, that area was designated in the early days by William Penn, settlers, etc. I think it was called Hamilton Village in the 1700s. The Hamilton Church is still one of the last standing pieces of that long history. So there were people here long before University of Pennsylvania. Hamilton Village had the boundaries go as far out north to Mantua. Then later on, in the 1800s, it changed to Greenville. A new group of people come in and deed it in. They close the boundaries in and bring it from Mantua in to Lancaster Avenue. And all of the boundaries still stay the same. Now, the population at that point in time, and this is pre-Civil War, the population was largely Italian, Polish, Irish, German, Jewish, Catholic, and blacks. A significant number of blacks. The their cottage industry was largely husbandry and raising sheep and cattle, what have you. The marketplace was located at 40th Street, 40th and Market. That was the marketplace. So they took their wares there, right, for almost 100 years or more. They were a rowdy group, as I'm told, historically, and they had their pubs, and they loved their bars, they loved their drinking, they loved their fighting. University of Pennsylvania will not come into this area until 1873. So between 1700 and thereabouts circa, and 1873, that's a long time. So first, Penn will bring in an almshouse, what I'm told, from Pennsylvania Hospital, and move it on the property where VA Hospital is, or maybe on the other side of VA Hospital. And I think that'll become eventually the Philadelphia General Hospital. At that time, Penn is now going to encroach on Baltimore Avenue, Woodland Avenue, Chester Avenue, all which ran straight through this college campus. See, I played as a kid on Locust Street, where my friend Roxanne Jones, who I went to elementary school with, lived at 40th and Locust, right? So we knew this as Locust Street, and we ran up and down Lancaster Avenue. My middle school was the Newton School, located at 38th and Woodland Avenue. That's where the cemetery is now, over there. That's where the VA hospital is, next to the cemetery. It was a vibrant community, largely made up of the population I told you. Most whites lived, after 1873, most whites were living south of Ludlow Street. Blacks came in large numbers, and particularly after the Civil War, after the 1860s. And that's how it got its name. The lower end of West Philadelphia, the bottom of West Philadelphia, largely inhabited by blacks, hence the Black Bottom. Okay. And I am a proud product of the Black Bottom. Okay. And when I die, that's what I want on my tombstone, right? That I survived the Black Bottom. It was a wonderful neighborhood, wonderful community. I was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey. My mom and dad had to move here because we didn't have the wherewithal. Atlantic City was segregated and black people couldn't work. My father couldn't work. He worked at the farmer's market and was paid vegetables. We couldn't sustain that too long. My mom and dad had 8 children, and so we were living with my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and grandfather when I was born. And then as they're having these babies, it's getting difficult to stay in the whole same household, right? Because I had an aunt there plus her 2 children. So my mom and dad moved, but we went to a little 2-story house around the corner from Virginia Avenue. And because it was tight, my father and mother elected to farm my sisters out. So I had 5 sisters and 3 boys. The 3 boys stayed in Riders Avenue with my mom and dad. And the girls, 2 of them went to Philadelphia to live with my stepsister Meredith and my stepsister Blanche. Another one went to live with my great aunt Bee in Philadelphia. And then 2 others stayed with my great aunts in Atlantic City, Aunt Florence and isn't that awful? It'll come to me, but it was Aunt Florence's sister. But in any event, I learned racism early in my life because Atlantic City was divided. Black people could not go south of Atlantic Avenue. That was a dividing line. Black people couldn't walk on the beaches. They helped build the boardwalks but couldn't walk on the boardwalks. They helped build the hotels but couldn't sleep in them. They helped build the kitchens, could cook in them but couldn't eat in them. So I learned that the hospital were segregated. Most of us were born home and were born with a midwife. So I learned racism, separation, segregation, and separation of family early on, and yet we were not necessarily a broken family, right? But this is the shaping, right? And there's a documentary that some people are doing on me called The Making of a Social Change Agent, right? And it talks about some of this stuff. So Atlantic City, right, will also have a history later on of gentrification. But I moved out of Atlantic City at age 5 and come to Philadelphia. And I live at 3645 Market Street. And what happened was my stepsister Meredith, had a beauty shop, and she had a flat in the back. She allowed our father, to move his wife and the 3 boys, me and my 2 brothers, to stay in those rooms. My dad was torn from the separation of my sisters. He worked hard, tirelessly to try to get those girls back into the household. He would die when I was 11 years old. I then become the man of the house. It becomes my responsibility to help get them back. And I would. And at that point in time, I had my 5 sisters would come back, and the 3 boys, so 8 children and 1 woman. My mother would meet my stepfather. We live in this area called the Black Bottom at 3645. They'll have 5 more children. And then 1 dies at birth, so there'll be 12 children and 2 adults living in 2 rooms. I share that because there's an issue about poverty. Because poverty becomes an excuse for gentrification. Mm-hmm. See, poor people don't oftentimes look at poverty the same way other people look at poverty, right? And I broke my mother's heart one time because I read a report from the University of Pennsylvania which talked about our community being an impoverished area. See, I brought the hype. And I told Mom, do you know that we're living in poverty? Oh my God, I broke her heart. She said, what are you talking about, boy, right? And I went on to try to, as young people thinking they're smart, know more than the elders do, right? I'm going to argue the case, right? And I'm going to talk about the fact that from time to time we can't pay the rent, etc., right? I'm making the case for gentrification. See, it seems to me like colonization can't exist in the absence of the people who are being colonized also participating, even unwittingly. I was a champion of my mother and my brothers, my sisters. I was a champion of that neighborhood. That neighborhood was a great neighborhood, a proud neighborhood. That was a neighborhood that was bounded, that I gave you. But if you walked along 34th and Market Street going south-north along 44th Street, you had big brownstones. Come to 36th Street from Market going over Lancaster Avenue. Brownstones on the east side, graystones on the south side. Come up to 37th Street, repeat. 38th Street, same. 39th Street, the same. 40th Street was a commercial district. The tenement houses were largely along Market Street, between 36th Street up to 38th, 39th Street. So we live in a tenement. But if you look at the history, the narrative written by the University of Pennsylvania and by the Planning Commission, whose effort it was to take the land from us, right, we were poor. Now it's important to understand that they had the tools of government to help them do this. And it's a classic model used all around the country and around the world. So the first thing is the government supports them in having eminent domain. The ability to take land from someone who owns it for a price less than what it's worth for the betterment of the larger community, the greater good. So Penn wanted to move. Between 1873 and the turn of the century, they built one building, the Alms House, and 30 some other buildings and structures were built in the area. So now they're thinking, we need to really move. So by the time the turn of the century comes, the 1900s, by 1950, they're thinking, let's go out. So they're saying, let's go west towards City Line Avenue. And that's poo-poo. Let's go north towards Mantua. And a couple of white liberal and progressive politicians, Mayor Richardson Dilworth and Joe Clark, who became the DA, district attorney. They were both DAs. One became a senator, Clark did, and Dilworth became the mayor. They convinced Penn, along with Ed Bacon, the planner of Kevin Bacon's dad. Kevin was born here, right? So what happens is Bacon is the premier designer, architect, world known. So he's here in Philadelphia. So they convinced Penn, stay where you are, expand. Get an urban development grant. Now I'm sort of paraphrasing because I'm not privy to all these meetings, but I'm parsing, putting stuff together, right? And the idea is you should be able to take the land where you are. Now 3,000 people live on this land, largely black. They target it. So the people ask the question, well, they were going to improve it and they're going to give them the right of first refusal. That's nonsense, right? There is no such thing as right of first refusal. When you put properties, you take a property, give them less than what the value is. They're up in age, they can't get a mortgage. You're going to offer them a rebuilt house that costs more than what the one that you gave them to build. So the right of first refusal is just an excuse. They try to sell that to a lot of the community. Mm. And because of my aggressiveness, my kind of abrasiveness, I was disrupting a lot of the meetings in the neighborhood. I was turning things like this, these cameras, and throwing them out on the floor and turning over tables and ripping up architectural designs, what have you, right? But the community, I was a son of the community. They could tolerate certain things. I mean, because also I went through a rites of passage, which most young people have to, young males have to, who's going to protect the community. And I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to become a caretaker for the community, to fight for the community, right? And I became the warlord of the community at age 16 years old. And I protect every man, woman, and child that lived in the boundaries I just shared with you, right? And so my attitude was very, very different than the people who've been homeowners and lived there. I didn't have a home. It was like to sleep in my own bed until I left home at 17, 18 years old, right? But I love these people. These were the people who helped make me. All that I am, I owe to the poor, right? And so they use their money, they use their political connections, they use the state authority. The state authority says, we'll allow you to bank land. You can take the land and don't even have to build on it. Put it into a land bank. We'll give you money to help you do this. I mean, Penn had some money, but it was also using federal money. So, but the problem, Penn, is we can't do this taking unless the community is an impoverished community. I didn't describe to you an impoverished community. I just described to you a very vibrant, vital community made up of middle class and upper middle class black people and poor people, working class poor. Because everybody, as poor as they were working in that community. They gave me my work ethic along with my dad, right? So this drive to constantly be on the move and constantly doing things. So Penn had to create the poverty it needed in order for the taking. Classic model can be used around the country to understand. See, that's why what happened is, as I was fighting them and learning all this stuff, I was called on to fight all the other communities. Temple, when North Philadelphia, Drexel going into Mantua, LaSalle into Oak Lanes, St. Joe's into Winfield, all those takings that you saw in the Black Bottom site, I led those fights, right? Largely because, we had lived through it and we were able to help people. And we were joined by students on Penn's campus. So when students ask, what can they do? You can be alert, you can be conscious, you can raise questions, you can challenge, right, premises and authority, right? And that's what happened here. And so in 1969, at the height of our battles, when we had finally dug in, and I was really we were having guerrilla warfare in the streets against Penn. I mean, one time we were turning over cars and setting them on fire, right? And I remember stretching barbed wire across 40th Street. Any car, if you don't have any idea what barbed wire was like, get a car in barbed wire, right? You do not want to get your car ever in barbed wire. But I knew what it was like. And we shut down the state stores. We used to tell the guys who drank, you have to picket, you have to demonstrate, and you have to go get your bottle somewhere else outside the neighborhood. They were down with the program. Hey, it's our community too, right? So everybody's in for the battle. And Penn students wanted to know how they could get involved. So they invited me to come on Penn's campus. I've always had a love-hate relationship with Penn because I grew up in their shadow. But my first time I got locked up at 12 years old, it was for burglary and grand larceny and grand theft, burglarizing University of Pennsylvania dormitories, right? And people said, why? It was a crime of opportunity. I lived at 36th Street. The fraternities I lived at 36th and Market, the fraternities at 36th and Chestnut. Just a walk away, right? And I don't celebrate that. I just tell that as a part and parcel of growing up. And I don't blame it on poverty. I don't blame it on poor parenting. I don't blame it on separation, on my father's death, etc. None of that. It's just a part of the story, right? But Penn was able to buy through straw purchases, buying property all along the way in a checkered way, and then doing nothing with the property. You know what the impact of the partition wall is if one house is standing and another house is falling apart. And then it's forced to have to tear it down. And they created a picket fence of houses in a beautiful neighborhood, a wonderful neighborhood. This was so traumatic to me and to all the people who, by then I had in the 70s, the 60s, I was traveling all over the country fighting in the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement. But I never turned my back on my community. And my mother still lived there. And my stepfather and my siblings were still there. So and even if they weren't there, I was the Black Bottom, and I was the heart and pulse beat of the Black Bottom, and I was a caretaker, and so I would have been in the fight anyhow, right? So that sets the stage for court battles. So they have the court, they have the state authority, they have the city council, they have the planning commission, they have the press, they have eminent domain, they have all the tools they need. We have human people. We have people who are strong and want to fight. But someone said, yeah, we could beat them in a fist fight, but this is not going to be a fist fight. They're going to come at us with pencils and pens, and they're going to come at us with drawings, and they're going to come at us with the law and with court orders, what have you, right? It's kind of a different fight. It was hard for some people to believe it, but that's really what happened. And so people were being disrupted, and their lives had been set asunder. They were going pushed every direction, right? So it finally broke up those 3,000 families. It took time. Resistance was strong, but eventually they did it. But along the way, I continue to say what we have to do is create a template, a learning model, a toolkit in terms of how to fight and how to resist. And the reality, what you come to realize is you have to use some of the same tools. I mean, I think Audre Lorde talks about the fact that you can't use the master's tools. Well, you can if we engineer them. I mean, it's almost the same thing on Pedagogy of the Press, right? And the whole thing is refine and reclaim and rename, right? When Paulo Freire talks about getting your liberation, right? And so that became the impetus for this move.
What do you think is the responsibility of an urban college or university to the city and the neighborhoods that it's embedded in?
I think what happens is universities talk about the fact that they exist as nonprofit entities and should be treated as a nonprofit entity. It gives them a certain amount of perks from the city government and from the tax coffers. I think students need to understand that all of these privileges that they get arises from somewhere. America is a country built on white skin privilege and black skin disadvantage. And I think that's the first thing you need to think about. Who is it that is benefiting and who is it that is being denied a benefit? In almost anything I do, I have to ask myself, as a black person, I have to ask myself, because remember, in the colonial process, the colonized will wind up impersonating the colonizer. So we get trained on how to keep the process going, and a lot of our behaviors, our assumptions, our beliefs, etc. So I think that students have to constantly be investigating, constantly questioning, constantly challenging, right? Constantly pushing the envelope, right? I mean, and it's a practice that they should do for themselves, because eventually they'll live in a neighborhood somewhere. And now, eminent domain has been expanded beyond belief. It has gone into very wealthy communities, and the court has stood with those who come in, with the colonizers, or the people who are expanding, the expansionists, and or the gentrifiers, taking land from very wealthy people. See, what happened is they didn't fight with poor people were fighting against eminent domain, so they had no allies when it went and affected their neighborhoods. I mean, we're all just one act away, from being the subject of a forced move or displacement, what have you. We really don't own land. You really don't own it. And at any time it can be taken, it can be snatched for mortgage foreclosure, it can be snatched for eminent domain, it can be snatched for any number of things for coding. So we don't really own it. It's only borrowed for a while.
Thank you. I mean, we kind of we kind of got into this a little bit, but we want to end by asking you.
What are your recommendations for social workers, policymakers, and members of this community going forward? You spoke a bit about what Penn students were doing in decades past, and for current students and future students, how can they kind of build on that work? What can and should we be doing to apply what we know about Penn and about gentrification?
I think the thing is, students need to raise this issue. It should not be allowed to die. Okay. Mm-hmm. When I went off to law school in '71, when I came back, we were still fighting Penn. I came back. I was 40 years old, right, and I got my Juris Doctorate in '74. What I did was I helped to create the Black Bottom Reunion. And in the Black Bottom Reunion, we have a picnic we've had every year since 1974. Okay, that's over 40-some years or more. It was the largest gathering of a community in the history of Philadelphia, and the most consistent, the longest running, and still runs now. The students, over the years, I used to take them out to those picnics as a learning experience. Students have to get engaged. In the 1960s, when we were in the midst of the fight of 67, 68, there were students on Penn's campus that I took into the neighborhoods. One particular person I took was named Ira Harkavy. Ira Harkavy was a second-year student here, but he wound up being very interested in this. And Ira helped to organize students and faculty, and together with the community, they picketed and demonstrated. They took over College Hall. And this was even before the Graduate School of Social Work students took over this building and demanded the racism courses, right? These are bold steps by students, right? And I remember they were being threatened by the police. Commissioner Frank Rizzo said at that point in time that if they didn't desist their protests at College Hall and Irvine Auditorium, etc., he was going to bring the tanks in. And that was one of the rumors of that. And I said to Ira and those guys, you guys cannot, and maybe in hindsight they should have been allowed to do their protests and not have someone come in and try to redirect them. I don't want to see you run over by the tanks, because he will do it. I believe he will do it. Now, at the same time, I was prepared to be run over by the tanks, and I was prepared to have my guys and my women in my community run over by the tanks, but somehow I think that that's what we're supposed to do. No. In hindsight, so were they. Everybody who really believes in social justice and social change and really is committed to human justice, right, has to see themselves, their bodies, they use their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies, right, to confront the system, to confront the machine. It was because of Ira and his cohorts that we were able to force the Board of Trustees to halt the construction into the neighborhood. Kind of late. We built what was called the quadripartite agreement, four-party agreement, with no future expansion and or building into the community could happen in the absence of community, students, faculty, and Board of Trustees. We used that model at Temple and got the tripartite agreement when they were trying to take over 25% of the land mass in North Philadelphia. So with lessons learned, the Black Bottom will never come back again. It's gone, right? Except our memories and our love for it. And I'm proud of, in my memoirs, I'm writing about it now. But the point being is that we use our lives, right, as models for change. And students, every student has the power to do that. I constantly get on this school here about calling these students that here social change agents. They are not social change agents unless they've learned social change. Social change is an art, okay? And if you're not, we used to teach students here how to be social change. We have to use Brager and Holloway, used to use Kettner and design. I'm using it now in my 713 class. Every year I make sure students learn the basic tenets of the force field analysis for social change, right? But just saying these kids, because they come here, they get their degree, it's hype, it's false advertising, right? It's switching bait. It's not right. It's not right, okay? It's tuition driven. Be honest with them. Because the students are willing to do it. The students come here because they think there's some value in the race courses. They come here because they think there's some value in the social change courses. But you can't keep on tinkering with it and watering it down, right? I mean, it's just wrong. It's just patently wrong to do it. And that's been my fight with this university, and I expect that it'll be a continued fight because I see them now still trying to go back in, retinker, readjust, okay? And that's their white racism. The University of Pennsylvania is a bastion of white racism. The University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy is a practitioner of white racism. Both white liberals and white progressives, right? They continue to practice it, and they're totally unconscious of it. That's their white privilege. At the same time, they challenge other whites, right, for having dare to have white privilege, or dare to have white supremacy, or dare to have white ignorance. But they are allowed to be able to, because they're educated, they're the elites, right? The reason Donald Trump won the election was because of people who think like that, all across this campus, in this school, and around the country. And if not careful, if there's no lessons learned, guess what? He'll be reelected again. Now, he works for me. I'm down, because nobody has ever given me as much support of terms of educating people about America and American white supremacy and white racism, which is embedded within the entire society, institutionalized everywhere, right? I tell the students, the reality is you are the man, you are the system, you are the colonizer, because the very values that you have, and the very rejection and the very refusal to understand the impact of slavery in American society and its ongoing practice, and the way in which it is playing out today in modern day America, right, is contributory to the maintenance of status quo.
Woo. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Well,
Thank you so much.
I'm just
Wow.
glad my throat held up.
Just make sure.
Give me a copy if you can, if you forget
Yes.
something. If it works
Oh,
out.
I'm feeling so inspired.
Oh.
I miss getting to just like hear you
I know.
speak. I
Oh,
miss that.
I
You
know.
know, like
It-
there's so much wisdom